Okay then, before I start today's Raspberry Pi 4 and Raspberry Pi 400 Amiga Game Selector 2.5 setup guide, if you like today's video, hit notifications, subscribe and like so you don't miss upcoming retro emulation content. And just a quick note, I'm a massive Commodore fan and I've got tons of Commodore content on my channel with plenty more to come. So the easiest way to enjoy Amiga gaming here in 2024 is by using Amiga Game Selector. Everything is self-contained and it features most Amiga games, if not all Amiga games, in something called WHD load format, which means that we don't have to mess around with swapping ADF files and this and that. It's pretty much straight into the action with a really nice user interface, which is really accessible and pretty user friendly. So we're going to need to grab a few things, or a couple of things rather, to get this started. So I'm going to leave the link in the description for the actual Amiga Game Selector website. From here, if we go to what's new, it's going to tell you what's new in the latest release of AGS 2.5 or Amiga Game Selector 2.5. So as we can see, this one actually released in the beginning of December 2023, so it's still fairly new. And I actually did a little setup guide for the Windows version of this about a month ago. So lots of improvements with the latest version of this, lots of information there to read. So we need to download the image itself, specifically the Raspberry Pi image, which is of course going to work with the Raspberry Pi 4 and the 400. So what we need to do next after downloading it is actually grab ourselves some software in order to flash the image onto. So I'm going to be using Bellina Etcher for this. If I just download Etcher, and I'm going to download the portable version. Now you can obviously grab an installer of Bellina Etcher, but because I don't use this too often, I've just gone for the portable. So download is now complete. And here we go then. So we've got Bellina Etcher open, and I've also got my Raspberry Pi image of Amiga Game Select. Actually just extract that image. So if I just left click on it and drag it out onto my desktop, this is going to take a little while. Amiga Game Selector 2.5 is quite a sizable image, so just let this extract. Okay then, so we've now extracted our Amiga Game Selector. So if I just delete the archive, I just downloaded this in. Next thing we're going to need is a SD card. Now I'm going to be using a 128GB SanDisk Ultra micro SD card. If I just pop this into my computer, and the first thing we need to do is go back to Bellina Etcher. If we go to Flash from File, what we're going to do is just navigate to that image that we just extracted. So it's on my desktop, as we can see. So if I double left click on the Pi 4 image, next thing we need to do is just make sure that the SDXC card, which I'm using, is selected. If you find this isn't the media that you've got inserted, then just swap around and check the media that you've put in order to flash. In my case, the SDXC card is the only media I've got inserted, which is of course my micro SD card. If I select that, I then go to flash. And as we can see, it's now beginning to flash, and the image itself weighs in at 31GB as identified by the Etcher software. Now you're also going to find that estimated time, says currently for me 15 to 16 minutes. This can fluctuate and it can take a considerable amount of time sometimes. So just be patient with this and just let it flash onto your SD card. Okay, so once you've seen it's finished flashing, it's going to go on to the next process, and that's validating. Now, it's entirely up to you, really, if you want to leave this to reach 100%, but 99% of the times, it's already flashed. If we just go to skip this, flash completed, and that's it. So what I'm going to do next is just take out my micro SD card, and I'm going to go over to my Raspberry Pi 400. And I'm also going to make you aware, for people using the Raspberry Pi 400, just make sure your mini HDMI cable is actually on the left hand side. If you put this through a 4K TV and it's on the right hand side, in my case, it runs very slow. So if you get this problem, yeah, make sure HDMI is in left rather than the right port. I'm also going to make you aware that before you actually plug in your power, just make sure you've got a controller connected. So here we go, this is the boot up sequence for Amiga Game Selector. So here we go then, the same version what's going to be available on the Amiga Mini, which I've already got on my Amiga Mini, and it's pretty much the same as what was on the Windows version, which I did a setup guide for a while back. So this is your main game selector screen. So as you can see here, we've got many different features. We've even got emulators, which is at the top. We've got Amstrad CPC emulator, C64, MSX, ScumVM, ZX Spectrum, and a couple of consoles too. And other extra games, we got some modern day games such as one of my favorites, which is Box 4, plenty there. And if we come out again, we got an AGA section, and there are some very good games in AGA. We've obviously got all the obvious ones like Civilization and Charlie J. Cool, Capital Punishment 2. So everything's in alphabetical order, and a really good thing with this is, say you want to search for a Psygnosis game, then if we just go down to games by publisher, we can then search for publishers, and of course Psygnosis is a very popular publisher for the Amiga, so if we just search for that, we'll likely see the entire Psygnosis catalogue. So here we go. So of course Shadow of the Beast is likely going to be there. We got Lemons, First Samurai, Shadow of the Beast 1 to 3, and there's also a US version of this, Shadow of the Beast 3, and we've also got a Shadow of the Beast demo, so not sure what that's about. And of course it's got the awesome Walker, which is a really fun game. And if we come out, we can even look for games by system. So of course we got the Amiga CD32 here, as well as the Commodore CD-TV. If I go into CD32, we've got all the Amiga CD32 games there. So yeah, fair enough, most of them aren't really any different from the original Amiga games, but the sound is slightly going to be better. CD-TV, we got a few CD-TV games. We can also search for games by theme, so driving games, gremlin graphics games, movie games. We can also search for games by year. Now this is very handy if you're into the homebrew scene. For example, if I just go down to 2022, we're going to have several releases there from 2022, including the Turrican 2 remake, which is the AGA version. We also got Wonder Boy there. And for 2023, we've got several just there. And if we just go to the bottom and go to themes, we can actually change how this interface looks. So AGS themes, we can change colors, and it gives you a little showcase of the color changes there. We can also go down to Amiga OS and actually change the theme to a Kickstarter theme. So let's go for 3.1 version 2. There you go, so it looks a lot like Workbench style. And we've also got retro games themes here, including Cannon Fodder and Monkey Island, which I know a lot of people like. And if we go to options, which is the fourth up from the bottom, we got boot options here. Now, the good thing with Amiga Game Selector is that we got the
option to actually boot direct into a modern day workbench. So if you select boot to workbench and press enter on that, when you open up Amiga Game Selector again, it's going to go straight into workbench. This isn't the only way you can get into workbench. If I actually press escape on my Raspberry Pi keyboard, that is then going to take us into workbench. So from workbench, we can actually play games from here. So we've got AGS drive. If we go into AGS drive, you're going to find 4 folders here. So we got game, alphabetically listed. So if we go to T, we got all the WHD load games in here. Not sure if I said it at the start of the video, but WHD load just means that our Amiga game collection is going to load up a lot quicker rather than swapping discs around. So let's just test one of these out. So I'm randomly going to go for Turrican 3. And if you're loading it from this way, then you just open up the drawer and you just double left click on the game art. So there we go. And just remember that F10 quits out of this game. Any game, in fact. Now you're going to find on your first time booting this, your controller isn't going to work. So in order to get your controller working, you need to press F12. Now if you're using a Raspberry Pi 400 like myself, you got an FN button, which is second in from the left. If you hold that down and then press your F2 button, that's going to bring us into this menu. And from here, you can just go down to input using a mouse and just make sure that port 1 is selected as your controller. So I've got my Google Stadia controller just here, and that's in port 1. Now sometimes with Amiga games, ports is going to vary. Most of the time port 1 with your controller is going to work fine. Always remember that we also need a system mouse. Now we also got option here, a little button to swap ports. So if a game isn't working with your controller in port 1, then just swap it over and that's going to change it to port 0. But from my experience, port 1 for your controller works fine. And the good thing to do with this is you can actually go to configurations and then just make sure default UAE default configuration is highlighted and just go down to save. That's then going to save that configuration, and then we can go back to resume. And now my Stadia controller is working just fine. Okay, something else you might need to be aware of is, again, by holding down FN and the F2 button to bring us back to this menu, we can actually look at display settings as well. So if you're getting any issues, just drop down to display, and from here we've got screen mode. Currently this for me is in full screen. We also got full window and windowed, and we also got a resolution just here, which I've currently got to 1920 by 1080, which is obviously 1080p. On the side here, we've also got interlace line mode, which is on double frames for me. And we also got line mode for double. If I go to scan lines and select that and go to resume, that then gives us scan lines. So I'm not sure if that's actually come out very clear. Personally, I'm not a big fan of scan lines, so I'm going to just put it back to the default with double. We also got resolution. So at the moment this is on high res normal. If I put this as super high res and resume, the image quality by putting that to super high res is a lot better. We also got correct aspect ratio, which is checked. If I uncheck this and go to resume, the image is going to be slightly stretched, but some of you might prefer that almost stretched, more of a fuller picture image. I'm going to put this one back to correct aspect ratio. We also got blacker than black. If we select this one and go to resume, there's a slight noticeable difference with the dark colours on that, but personally on my TV, I think unchecking this one, that is blacker than black, looks a lot better. So just remember that WHD loads games predominantly quit out of them by pressing the F10 key. And if you're using a Raspberry Pi 4, a standard say 8GB, 4GB Raspberry Pi 4, then obviously your F10 button is going to work on a modern conventional keyboard. And from this desktop mode, if you want to go back into the AGS, which is Amiga Game Selector, you'll find at the bottom a little bowling ball. Just double left click on that, and that's going to bring us back into Amiga Game Selector.